On this episode of the Dairyland Initiative podcast, we're going to be talking about transition cow facility design. Hi, I'm Courtney Hallbach.
And I'm Nigel Cook.
And this is the Dairyland Initiative podcast,
where we get to discuss issues related to the housing and management of dairy cattle.
Let's dive in.
Well, Courtney, in our last episode, I talked about animal behavior and cows in transition.
Yep.
And we left off with the development of what we call the Wisconsin Blueprint for transition cows, asking farmers to create facilities with 4 requests.
Yep.
For all the cows to eat at the same time.
Yep.
For all of the cows to be able to lie down at the same time.
Yep.
A comfortable, soft surface to rest upon.
Yep.
And to try not to move cows within the critical week before calving.
That's 4 things.
It's 4 things. And we arrived at that based on the information that we'd put together on cow behavior, the risk of moving cows between groups and the social turmoil that creates, our better understanding of feeding behavior, of cows wanting to eat all together, and certainly transition cows in a situation where they didn't get access to fresh feed when it was delivered, not going back and eating more later on when they failed to access that feed, and our understanding of the importance of surface and lameness, and, just trying to put all these things together.
Yeah, so this transition cow blueprint really focuses on trying to cater to the subordinate cows in the group.
Yeah, because remember, again, 20 years ago, health was a disaster. We just weren't doing very well to prevent periparturient diseases. And so disease isn't something that happens to the average cow. It happens to a subset, a proportion of the herd. And we were hypothesizing that subset were low-rank cows that were kind of struggling in these different situations.
Yep. We're going to build so that we are taking care of both our dominant and subordinate cows, and that's going to mean some overbuilding.
Yep. It does, yeah, and we have to economically justify that.
Yep.
And you can't do that by preventing 5 displaced abomasums. The attempts to put economic numbers on health events generally result in a cost of about $300 per case of fill in the blank. Metritis, milk fever, displaced abomasum. Usually comes out about the same because it causes about the same reduction in milk production and about the same elevation in risk for culling. That, again, doesn't get you a dry cow barn built. It gets you a broom closet. So what we have to do is justify the expense through milk. And milk needs to be linked back to early lactation performance.
And I'm guessing that's where you got the idea for the transition cow index.
This is why we've used this index, this estimate of how much a cow should produce at her first test weight, using her prior history. So that was the element of this calculation, using the prior history of each cow to predict how much milk she would produce at first test, compare that to what she actually produced. If she produces what we estimate, then the TCI is 0. It's right on the prediction. But if she produces less milk,
it's a negative.
It's negative, and so we turn that loss into a 305-day milk. So we can do that with various calculations so that you can look at potential lactational loss of milk.
Okay. And then if there's a positive,
you're plus. You're plus 300 pounds, or as we saw last time, we're typically on over 10 years, we've improved TCI by about 400 points.
Okay.
400 pounds of milk over a lactation from better transition cow performance. So how do we go about doing it?
I was going to say, how can we do that? Can we do something with facility design?
All very well saying, well, you got to give them enough space. Again, think back to how we used to do this. Do you know how we used to do it?
You did just talk about feeding and 3-row pens and everything else in the last episode.
But, how do you decide how big to make the close-up pen?
You just guess Look at the calendar, figure it out?
We were better than that, Courtney.
Oh, okay.
Everything worked off average. Off average throughput. So you thought, okay, there's an average of X number of cows calving, and so you kind of build around that average. That was helpful, but by definition failed half the time. Because if you build around average, you're going to be overstocked 50% of the time. So what we realized was, if you've got a fresh pen and you add a cow, to avoid overstocking, you can move a cow into the next pen along.
Yes.
Yeah, so one cow in, one cow out. But when you have a pre-fresh or close-up pen,
with cows that you're waiting to calve,
you kind of have to wait for them to calve. You can't just put a cow in that pen and then take another cow out. The cow gets to decide when she leaves that pen.
I've heard that before.
There's another saying on my gravestone. This is the only pen on the farm where the cow gets to decide when she leaves it. She has to calve. Yeah.
And I can imagine huge bottlenecks in this area of the barn.
It's a biological system. It's not a car manufacturing plant. So sometimes we have a lot of cows calving. And you have to put cows into the close-up pen, and you have to wait for them to calve.
Yeah.
And so we overstock. And so that's where the system breaks down, because in that situation now you have cows competing for a place to lie down, a place to eat, and as you add cows, those social contacts become more intense and that turmoil increases.
So how can we overcome that?
So we're simply asking, hey farmer, make a pen big enough for all of the cows to eat at the same time. Much trickier to actually implement than us just simply asking for that.
Yeah.
One of the issues is that throughput varies. The other issue is there's a variation in gestation length. About 90% of the cows with a 14-day variation in gestation length. So they're not robotically calving at 280 days. Actually, it's usually a little less than that these days, about 278, 279. But there's plus or minus 7 days of variation. You have to accommodate that into the approach. So it leads to overbuilding these critical transition areas on the farm.
Yeah.
And we justify that because every cow on the farm goes through the transition cow pen. You're not just building a lactating cow pen where a milking cow spends her lactation in that one area.
No, you're dispersing this cost across the entire herd.
Exactly. So multiple cows go through these areas, and the cost of that area is defrayed across the whole herd. Yeah. So that's kind of the concept of overbuilding, of trying to justify that.
Well, and then when you look back at the transition cow index, you can see that improvements in bunk space, resting space, all lead to a positive TCI.
Exactly. And we were able to kind of have that discussion with the industry and kind of show that that was happening. So you have to overbuild. The question is, how much? Well, if you look at the calving rate, and this is the weekly calving rate on a herd, the blue line in this little diagram here is the number of cows and heifers calving per week. And it's not a straight line.
Nope.
It goes up and down. It has two big peaks in this scenario here. So while the average on this herd is 50 cows, it can be up to 70 cows or 80 cows at times. Those are the pinch points.
Yeah.
Because that's where those close-up maternity areas are getting squeezed.
Yep.
So we say, let's build to the 90th percentile.
And why the 90th percentile?
Because we had to pick something. We're not going to tell everybody to design facilities for the absolute max, because there are very few weeks where that occurs.
Yeah.
And as you look from week to week, you gravitate towards the mean the longer you spend in the pen. So if you're there for 3, 4, 5 weeks, you're not going to have the impact of those single weeks as much as if you're in there for just a short period of time.
Or two.
Exactly. So the 90th percentile was a fair estimate of saying, okay, we're not going to go crazy, but we're going to try to accommodate most things 90% of the time.
Yeah.
And if you've got a herd with a given herd size and you're not expanding, you can calculate that. You can download information and perform that calculation. But frequently, as you know, we're designing facilities for expanding herds and new herds where we're adding cows and we don't have the historical information. Mm-hmm. So what we needed was an estimate of the 90th percentile from the weekly calving rate. Mm-hmm. And it turns out when you look at dozens of herds and you look at records like this, that the best estimate of that 90th percentile was multiplying the weekly calving rate by somewhere between 1.3 and 1.5.
So 130 to 150%.
Exactly. The longer you're in the pen, you can go with the lower number, because again, you'll gravitate towards the mean. Mm-hmm. The shorter you're in the pen, you'd have to go with the higher number.
Because there's less time in that period.
So that's what we went with. So just to talk through how you go about doing that calculation, you start with the total number of cows. Yep. So that's milking
and dry.
And dry, exactly. And you can estimate that from the milking herd by multiplying by 1.16 because typically cows spend 1/16 of the time in their dry period. But you start with the total number of cows. In our all-year-round calving herds, they tend to freshen or calve about 10% more than the average number of cows.
And did you get this number from data or?
Yeah, just lots of data, looking at different herds and doing this over and over again.
And it does vary across countries.
It does, yeah. So this is for all-year-round calving herds. Mm-hmm. And to get the number of cows on average calving per day, you would take the total herd size, milking and dry, multiply it by 1.1, so 10% more, and divide by 365.
Days in a year to get the average number of calvings per day.
Yep. If you're seasonal calving, you divide by the length of your calving period. Mm-hmm. Yep, not 365, might be 100 or 200. But that gets you the throughput per day. Yeah.
Okay.
So from that starting point...
And that's just the average.
That's just what you expect as an average. And then you say, well, I'd like a close-up pen for cows to stay for 21 days, not 1 day. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so you multiply that by 21. And then we put the multiplier in. Okay. So that's the 1.3 to 1.5. So that's the overbuilding.
And that's all based on the number of days the cow are going to be in a certain pen.
Yeah, exactly. So for stays of 3 weeks or more, 1.3, less than 3 weeks, 1.4, less than 3 days, like a maternity pen, 1.5.
And that sounds like a lot.
Yeah.
But you are hedging your bets against that variability between that short period of time.
You're trying to estimate that 90th percentile where you have that cushion. Mm-hmm. A little bit like you talked about with the calf barns. Yeah, with the calf facilities. So if you have 1,000 total cows, milking and dry, you multiply that by 1.1, divide by 365, you get 3 cows and heifers calving per day in that 1,000-cow dairy. So for a 21-day close-up pen, you multiply that by 21, and then because it's 21 days, we're going to choose that 1.4 multiplier, so that means we're building that pen for 89 cows.
So we need 89 resting spaces and
89 feeding spaces
at 30 inches or 75 centimeters per cow.
Exactly. So that step calculates, multiply by 30 inches, gives you the bunk space, so total bunk area, and then straight up 1 stall per cow, you've got the number of stalls that you need. Yep. But you've overbuilt. Yeah. And so oftentimes we're trying to squeeze these pens into a certain area on the farm, so that's when the compromises start. Yeah.
What? There's compromises?
This is the ideal.
Okay.
This is the ideal. Okay. Yeah. So just to go through that as an example calculation. So yeah, we started building with no lactating cows in them.
What a mind shift.
Heresy.
This is
a beautiful transition cow barn with a 3-row far dry pen on one side. So these are the cows from 60 days before to 21 days before. And on this side of the barn, we have a nice 2-row close-up pen.
And in our previous episode, you talked about the differences between 2 and 3 row pen. So why is it okay to do a 3 row pen in the far off dry and a 2 row pen in the close up pen?
Because we're sizing them, 1.3 to 1.4 times the average. They're in the far off dry pen longer, and so if we're building to that greater level, it won't be overstocked quite so much. And so you have to work with economics at some point, and you kind of look at it and go, pretty nice pen, nice stalls, nice comfortable place to lie down. We can probably get away with compromising a little bit on bunk space here versus the close-up area where we don't have as much wiggle room. This is a critical area where we need to maintain dry matter intake and throughput.
Makes sense.
Because they're there for a shorter period of time. And we were able to justify that overbuilding with good economics. So using Transition Cow Index, we were able to show barns that have been put into place, improving TCI over time, and that improvement in TCI converting to changes in overall milk production in the herd over a protracted period of time. It takes more than a year to get through this. But we were able to put economics together because we're counting more than clinical disease. Again, clinical disease doesn't get you this built. You have to factor in subclinical impacts on milk production and removal from the herd. And so that's what we tried to do here.
And you've created a partial budget where you can see how changes in facility design can have an impact on TCI.
It's easy to work out how much the building's going to cost you, because you can tell the builder, how big the pens are going to be, how much bug space, how many stalls. They'll have a cost per stall or a cost per square foot, so you can calculate the cost of the barn. And then with this calculator, we work out how many points of TCI we need to pay that barn off, amortize it over 10 years at typical interest rates. And those changes have been reachable. They've been within the realms of possibility of what we've seen.
What is reasonable? Like if we see a positive impact.
This one here was 700 points of TCI, and we got over 1,000 in the end. So
impressive.
It was absolutely possible. So moving on, what we see within our industry is a lot of herds utilizing far off and close-up pre-fresh groups. We use close-up and pre-fresh interchangeably. Typically having that pre-fresh close-up group together for around 21 days, for around 3 weeks. Maybe a little longer for heifers, around 3 weeks for the older cows.
Does this depend on herd size?
Not so much. Very, much smaller herds, 200 cows or less, it starts to get difficult to mix feed for small groups, and so they may have a one group dry period. But once you're in the sort of the 400 or 500 cow dairies, you are seeing a lot of that, and that's what's represented here in our surveyed herds in Wisconsin. So 95% of herds are doing this, and then we keep talking about this feed space of whether to have post and rail or headlock, of realizing that the original design of a headlock was meant to put 5 headlocks in a 10-foot span. So just by default, they became 24 inches wide. Cows aren't 24 inches wide.
Oh, a little bigger.
They tend to be 30 inches wide, and so that's why it's very common at bunk usage only to see 80% of the feed space is filled.
At that 24 inches of bunk space per cow. So
that's the cow we worry about, and that means we've pushed more towards 2-row pens for these risk groups. So
what about 30-inch headlocks?
30-inch headlocks will fill 100%. We've absolutely seen that. They tend to cost a little bit more.
Yeah, that's true.
And so as long as you don't mind putting in a headlock that the cow isn't going to use, 24 is fine. The cows will just work it out. And so that's the emphasis that we've seen a lot of 2-row here in the head to tail layout, so that the person observing cows for calving can stay out of the pen. They can stand in the feed lane and see the back end of every cow in a stall.
Without disturbing the piece.
Without having to go in the pen. Or you have a head-to-head where you have a drover's lane where you can walk all the way around the pen from the outside, and that's the example here and here.
To minimize any disturbances in the pen.
You don't want to have to walk into the pen to find calving cows all the time. It's good if you can stay out of the pen and look in. Those 2-row pens have been very successful in that manner. And then the other approach we've taken is exploring this all-in, all-out philosophy. And this is actually our own Arlington, our UW facility, where we have 5 bedded packs, all meant for between 10 and 12 cows. So they have more than 100 square feet, 10 square meters per cow lying area, soft, nice straw-bedded pack to lie on, and oodles of bunk space, Courtney.
And this all-in, all-out is applicable for both bedded pack facilities as well as free stalls.
Yes, you can apply it to a bedded pack system and to a free stall system. So basically a group of cows comes in from the far dry group, 10 cows come in here, and they stay there for the entire close-up period. They're fed a common ration, and they calve in that pen. They calve out of there, and the pen empties, you clean it, and then you refill it.
Okay.
So kind of all in, all out.
What about straggler cows that haven't calved yet?
You have to cheat from time to time because of this 14-day variation. So sometimes you'll have a cow that may have to be moved into an adjacent group. Yes, that creates a stress on that cow.
I was going to say.
But you were doing that for virtually all the cows before. So to just create a stress at one moment in time or infrequently, not ideal, but something you can manage around. We've seen multiple different facilities like this building around this concept of trying to maintain social stability through the dry period, not by having one big bedded pack, but by having multiple smaller bedded packs. And you can do that with free stalls too, with maternity pens and just-in-time calving. So we started to do that. The theory made sense to us, but did it have a positive impact on the farm?
Yeah. And
so there have been 2 studies looking at all-in, all-out versus traditional pre-fresh pen operations.
Where there's continuous filling.
Yeah. So one study was done actually at our Arlington facility, pretty small study, and a bit disappointing. It didn't really show anything. Didn't show any major impact on milk or NEFA or dry matter intake. Another much bigger study done on Jersey cows, so the proviso that it's not Holsteins, it's Jerseys. They probably need a little less feed space, and they're Jerseys, so who knows. And that study compared all in, all out versus a pen with weekly pen entries.
Okay.
And we'll come back to that. Bigger groups, large farm, 44 cow groups, and found kind of a mixed bag of results. No difference in most of the health outcomes, milk production, immune function, but significant outcomes in what we would absolutely expect in the behavior. And so when we compare the all-in, all-out systems, like those cows ate more for the first few weeks after they entered the pen versus the traditional where cows were coming in each week. So there was a higher intake there. Not to the point where it appears it impacted milk or anything else. And there were fewer displacements early on and actually throughout the stay in the pen. And a displacement is one cow pushing another cow away from the feed bunk.
Okay.
So we would absolutely expect this in a more socially stable situation. The cows don't have to spend as much time meeting and greeting, so they can spend more time eating. And because they know who each other is, less displacements. Just in this scenario, it wasn't enough to make an economic difference.
Okay.
But I think it's worth looking at these studies a little closer because we have 4 requests in our blueprint.
Yep.
Yeah. So we have 4 things, not just one. It's not just all about the avoiding moving in the last week. So in our study at the Arlington facility, these cows are on a bedded pack, very comfortable, deep straw surface.
I'm guessing a lot of space.
Oodles of space, more than 100 square feet of area to lie on, more than 30 inches of bunk space per cow, and we're comparing all in, all out with twice a week pen entries.
Okay.
And what what that's probably saying, again, on a small number of cows, is comfort and space trumps movement.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. On the bigger study with those little Jersey cows, that was a free stall situation with comfortable, deep, loose-bedded stalls with manure solids, stocked at maximum 1 cow per stall, so not overstocked relative to stalls, minimum 26 inches of bunk space per cow, not 30, but they're Jerseys, so still pretty good.
Okay.
Once a week pen entries was the control, the traditional approach. And you look at that and go, the other 3 requests of our blueprint are pretty well covered in that study. It's the fourth that's challenged.
Movement.
And in most commercial dairies, if we can have just weekly pen entries, we'd be kind of pretty happy with that. So I kind of look at this and go, I end up not being that disappointed, to be honest, that it didn't have such a big effect. Because I think there's still an effect on the cow. We've proven that behavior-wise. And the reality is it's really showing that stocking density has a part to play in this.
Yes.
And that's, again, been shown by our friends at UBC in their transition studies, that if you reduce the stocking density, you can reduce the negative impacts of
those more frequent movements.
Exactly. So it's not that it's not important, but space is more important.
I can get behind you on that.
Okay. Space is the key, if there's nothing else we remember from this podcast. And still trying to avoid, I think, moving cows between groups within the week before calving. Why do we say 2 to 7?
Yeah, that's
Once
such
you're
a weird...
within 48 hours of calving, I think cows are so focused on delivery. I don't think they care where they are. I think they're focused on going through the process of birth.
Okay.
So that's why it's become sort of 2 to 7 days. Because we have a lot of barns that operate pen movements within 2 days of calving, where that can be done quite successfully. Turns out that commercial dairies like group bedded packs for maternity pens.
Yes.
So we see that far more common. Actually, 69, 70% of the herds in our survey have group pens for maternity. And so then the challenge is managing that pen either to move cows in more than 7 days before they calve or less than a day.
Yep, just in time.
Yeah, just in time. And the bigger the dairy, the better you can manage just-in-time calving, sort of moving them at the point of calving. But smaller dairies can't do that.
No, because you don't have that 24/7 surveillance.
Robot dairies, 2X milking dairies, where you may not be there all the time. You got a 3,000 cow dairy, you've got somebody working in the maternity pen.
Yeah.
They're there all the time.
That's their job.
So you have to have an approach where, cows move into that maternity area several days before, and we would favor 7 days before. Bigger dairies really like the control they have with just-in-time calving, moving cows out of close-up pre-fresh with the calf's feet showing.
Yep, and
So
that's key.
Absolutely key. So the cow is in the process of delivery, and it's got to be an easy move. You can't be making that poor cow walk the length of the farm.
No.
It's open a gate and pop her in an individual pen. This is a 5,000 cow dairy where there's a dozen maternity pens, and they're all set up, they're all bedded, they're all ready. You move the cow in, you close the gate, she delivers, you milk the colostrum, you feed the calf. So we see that more in those larger farms. The requests we have of those dairies is they monitor the time the cow spends in those individual pens. Because you've got a caregiver walking the close-up area, and a mistake for them is going to be a cow calving in a close-up freestall.
Yep.
Yeah, cow delivers in the alleyway or something like that. So there's always going to be a tendency to want to move that cow too early.
Before she's ready, yep.
Yeah. And there's some good data to say that if you move them too early, you can disrupt the process of birth, create stresses, increase the risk of dystocia. So it really is, you've got to wait for the calf to be in the pelvis.
Okay.
It's basically reached the point of no return. Put the cow in a calving pen, let her deliver, and move on. So we have little writing boards where people can record when they move the cow into the pen and when she left and when the delivery occurred. So you can monitor that and make sure that it's a matter of a few hours, not days.
Exactly, because a lot of these pens aren't set up with access to the feed bunk. We still want water in the pens, but
absolutely,
it's only a couple hours that she should be away from
It's a few
feed.
hours, yeah. So that seems a critical element of that process. So that was our blueprint implemented in the industry from about 2005 onwards, and we saw a lot of farms, successfully do that. We built transition cow barns for the first time, which was very cool. There are some additional areas of focus. So we talked about Katie Proudfoot's work and that private place to calve.
Yeah, because at the point of calving, cows seem to seek a quiet space away from her herd mates.
Yeah, so designing that in, keeping that area quiet and separated away from the rest of the herd, but also within that pen, giving the cow something to lean against, where she can kind of know that another cow's not going to disturb her from her blind side.
And it really can just be a one-sided
Just a one-sided
barrier.
structure, yeah.
Yeah, it doesn't need to be a box.
I think we've got into trouble trying to implement those sort of sealed-in boxes. I think they become difficult to manage. So yes, the output of that is really just a sort of a vertical wall that cows can kind of lean against.
Yeah.
And then our good friends in Florida and over in Cal's working on heat stress in dry cows.
Who knew that ventilation and heat abatement was applicable to our dry cows as well as our lactating cows?
A lot of what we've talked about has been related to the lactating cow.
Yeah.
And they've shown that we have to cool dry cows as well.
Yeah.
Because if we don't, there are negative impacts on the milk production of that dry cow in the next lactation, but also
on her offspring.
Yeah.
And it's multi-generational.
And so, yes, it's the growth and performance of the calf when she's a calf, when she lactates, and when she gives birth again.
And I remember when I first started working with you, it was so easy to just forget about the far-off dry cows.
We have a habit of doing that.
Yep. And now with research that's out there, we can totally justify putting fans in.
At least fans.
Or even mechanically ventilating these facilities for our transition cows.
Absolutely. Those things have come along. Dry cows need cooling too. We've realized that.
Yeah.
Then we get to the fresh cow side of things.
Okay, so
once
she's
the
calved.
cow
Now
has
what?
calved, now what? The industry, I think, because we like ease of management, nutritionists like diets with extra goodies in for fresh cows, and it puts all the high-risk cows in one easy place to check on.
Yeah.
It's because we need to survey them for sick cows. We like dedicated fresh cow pens. So as the herds have got larger, 90+% of herds have a fresh cow pen, and the cows are in that pen typically 20, 21 days.
And this is a pen, though, that you could move her out sooner if space is getting tight.
Yeah. So you can push that cow out into the next lactation group.
If she's doing well.
Yeah. So, some cows are doing well at 10 days of milk. Other cows need to stay there for 30, 40 days. So you can have quite a bit of variation of stay in these fresh cow pens.
And these pens, we are still emphasizing space. So we're still looking at that one stall per cow and 30 inches of bunk space.
Well, think about it. You're locking the cows up to examine them. If you're in a 3-row pen, a third of the cows don't get locked up.
Yeah.
So it leads you to a 2-row pen again. And when the cow's locked up, we're looking for the cow that's not eating.
Yeah.
Yeah. So they're off intake, and we need to do that quickly and efficiently, because if we extend this lockup time, we know we shrink the time available for rest.
Yep. And now we're going to make non-sick cows sick.
That's another one of my sayings, Courtney. This headstone's getting pretty full.
It
I have to
is.
say. Folks. I'm gonna need some kind of mausoleum or something. To find the sick cows, we can't afford to make the well cows sick.
That's it.
That's the saying. So this was a farm we went to where they actually had a weird ketosis problem in the pen after the fresh pen. And this is lockup about third hour in.
Yeah, I don't see any cows eating.
They've eaten. They're standing there. There's about a handful, chewing the cud, but most of them are just standing there going, Let me out. Impacting negatively lameness, intake, rest, and ultimately in this situation, ketosis.
I'm guessing you have a recipe so that this doesn't happen?
It gets back to that sort of efficiency of checking cows, a finely orchestrated ballet of locking the cows up when they come back from milking, having fresh feed, maybe top dressed with a little hay, being able to walk the front of those cows and look for cows that aren't aggressively eating that ration, letting cows that don't need to be locked up anymore off, letting them out, and then working that pen and getting it done within about 90 minutes of the first cow getting locked.
Perfect.
So, really an hour, not 2 to 4 hours, as in this case. So what helps with that? Well, good people, good caregivers that know cows, that can identify cows off feed. But we have fewer of those these days, and so we're looking for technology to help us. We've had milk weights for a long period of time. Reductions in milk weight are going to be a day or two after the cow's off feed. So a lot of this technology is slower than just looking at cows properly. Rumination monitors, I think, are probably the technology that's been the most useful to a lot of farms in this respect. I think can be supplemental, but again, still are slower than good stock persons. Temperature, difficult to monitor. Activity, not convinced. Some of the parlor milk testings, you can look at fat protein ratios and things like that, may help a little bit. But milk weights, rumination, and a good pair of eyes. We have to train these people to look for cows that aren't eating aggressively and do a simple exam at the back of the cow, looking at rumen fill, looking at udder fill, not so much focus on taking temperatures.
Okay.
A fever is a normal event in the postpartum period. I think that just leads us down the road of using antibiotics where we don't need to. A fever has to be coupled with another clinical sign. It can't just be, this cow's running a temperature, I'll treat her. So using our eyes, I think, is most important, and using the technology available as a supplement. And then the big question for us going forward is, what do we do with the calf? We have developed a system where we're removing the calf pretty much at the point of birth to feed that animal colostrum, put them in a pen where we can monitor their intakes and care for them and watch them very closely. So we've kind of taken the duty away from the cow and the mother with some good reasons, with best of intentions. But it's created a very sort of alien approach to managing the cow that's very different from what our beef friends do, where calves stay on the cow, and a situation that honestly hasn't worked out that well. When we look at calf morbidity, mortality rates, we're doing it with the best of intentions, but the results are
not what we had hoped.
Meh. There's obviously excellent farms that do really well, but on average, we don't. So that's why last year I got together with Nina von Keyserling, and we sat down and wrote a paper and tried to think of all the things that we need to do as researchers to help farmers with different options, different ideas of what to do with the cow and the calf after calving. Because there are elements in the industry that want us to keep the cow and calf together. I personally look at it and kind of like that too. When you see some of the pictures and you think, this is great. But I think a lot of people have memories of this 30, 40 years ago, where it was an absolute hygiene disaster and just terribly difficult to manage. So we came up with a sort of action list. If we're going to ask the industry to do this, this is the research that needs to happen. And you've seen this.
I have. I had an opportunity to go to Finland. I was actually on vacation, but obviously anybody in the dairy industry knows.
Busman's holiday, you're off on farms on vacation.
Yep, exactly. So I had the opportunity to go to a few farms that implemented cow-calf contact, both where there was a group bedded pack and then another where there was a nurse cow with a group of calves.
Yep. And how did it look, Courtney?
From a researcher within the dairy industry, it was very novel. Mm-hmm. As a consumer of dairy products, it looked great.
Yeah.
And so it's how do you balance this and where do we go for it? I think this could be a solution for the industry in the future, but how do we do it? I know there's a lot of research going on now.
Yeah. And I think we need lots of answers to questions before marching down this road. But I think we've got a few brave producers that are trying it out and trying to answer those questions. Mm. And I think the industry has to be open to the possibility, because what we're doing right now isn't that good. Mm. It isn't like we're arguing from a point where we can say, well, we've solved all the problems. And as we've sort of gone through this, we have improved transition cow management so much. We've made huge improvements over the last 20 years. But there are still challenges and improvements that we have ahead of us. And I look at cow-calf separation as being a big part of that, and seeing if we can do something different.
How do you want to finish this one?
So that's a quick whistle-stop tour through implementing our blueprint for transition cows, showing what different farmers have done related to improving bunk space, giving cows a comfortable place to transition, and making sure that we try to reduce the stress on that cow through kind of moving between different groups as they go from being a dry cow to a lactating cow. Thanks for joining us.
The Dairyland Initiative is supported by industry leaders who are advancing cow comfort worldwide. We would like to say a special thank you to our premier sponsor, Saputo, who is providing the global community with high-quality dairy products made from high-quality milk from healthy and well-cared-for animals. We'd also like to say thank you to our other sponsors, SaveCows.com, Zinpro, GPS Dairy Consulting, 40 Barn, SureGain Trow Nutrition, Munters, J&D Manufacturing, VES Artex, Ventec, and Kestrel Instruments. Thanks for tuning in to the Dairyland Initiative podcast. Want more Dairyland Initiative? Be sure to subscribe to our podcast, follow us on our socials, and visit our website for all of the latest recommendations in dairy cattle housing and management. See you next time.